Hi, I'm Kirsten Kapur. I am the designer of the Manhattan Mist Shawl. Thank you for joining me for this video where I'll give you an introduction to the design as well as some tips for selecting colors. Okay, so since in this introductory video all you're really going to see are my hands with my band-aid on it, I cut my finger last week. I'm going to put a photo up. It's going to be my picture so you can picture my face while I work. So I'm not just a pair of hands. First of all, let's take a look at the shawl. Here it is in person. We have a few different techniques here. We've got some very basic garter stitch, some stripes, and then some slipped or mosaic stitches. Most important consideration when selecting yarns is selecting your colors to use in these slip stitches. It's very easy to choose yarns where your slip stitches will blend together and you won't be able to see this detail. Let me show you that. These two colors are really lovely together. And I might think, well, that one's green and that one's lilac, so they're two different colors. My stitches will show up. But in reality, they're not going to show at all. Here's a little swatch I made using these two colors. One trick I like to do is take a photograph of my yarn and make it black and white. Most of us can do that on the cameras we have on our phones. Just switch to a black and white image. And we'll go ahead and make this image black and white to show you how close the colors actually look in black and white. Another example might be these two. And here, this one's a bit darker, so we're definitely getting better. If you take a look at the black and white image of this, you'll see that there is a bit more difference. Here's an example of that knit up, and you can start to see the motif emerge. But still, it's a little too subtle, I think. I'd rather see that show up a bit better. So the colors I used in the shawl are really quite different. This gold and this deeper gray. These colors, as you can see in the shawl itself, really show up nicely and contrast against each other. And that's really your goal. So take a look at your black and white photos of your colors. If you're looking at yarns online, go ahead and try to make them black and white on your computer and see if you can compare what those colors look like. All right, I want to talk a little bit about needle size and selecting the correct needle size for the yarn when you're knitting a shawl. It's a little bit different than if you're making a jumper or a pair of socks. You actually want your needle size to be a little bit larger. I often get asked the question, why are you recommending a 3.75 millimeter or a 4 millimeter needle when actually the suggested needle size on my yarn, for example on this canopy yarn, which is one of the yarns we're using in our shawl, it suggests a 2.75 to 3.25 millimeter needle. The reason is in a shawl we want our fabric to be looser and drapier. You'll see in the willow and lark plume, they actually suggest a very broad range of needle sizes. They recommend a 3.25 to a 5 millimeter needle. That's because they know with this yarn people will likely do things like shawls. It's also got a lot of halo on it, a lot of extra sort of fluff coming off the yarns, so it will fill out and fill in the gaps even if you do use a larger needle. So you want a nice drapey fabric when you knit a shawl. Often people say that gauge is not important with shawls, and truthfully it's not extremely important, but you do want to make sure that your gauge is not way off because you don't want to run out of yarn, and of course you also want to end up with the size shawl that you expect. If your gauge is too tight, you might have a tiny shawl. If your gauge is too loose, you could run out of yarn. So you should be a little bit mindful of that, but you don't have to be as careful about it as you would if you were making a jumper.